And hello everyone, welcome back to another HTML tutorial. So in this tutorial, we'll be looking at forms and what you can do with them. So let me just update this to say forms. And yeah, we're going to remove this H1. We don't need it. And then we have a clean page once again. Cool. So what is a form? A form is basically what you use to send the data somewhere. So let's say I have an whole application, like a whole YouTube website. Now let's say I upload my video. Now I need to upload my video into a form. Or let's actually make it even easier. Let's go here and search twitter.com. So when I see this right here, that's a form that takes a text input. If I go here and say hello world, then this will actually be able to be confirmed as a form. I can add an image to the form. I can add a GIF, a smiley, basically anything. This is a very customized form, as you'll see as we go on. It's very customized. But when I say tweet, it sends this data to somewhere where we don't have to worry about now. It's called the backend. But we don't have to worry about the backend just yet. We'll get to that later. So it sends this to the backend. The backend stores it inside of the database. The database then later sends this data back to us. So if I say tweet, this was sent and to the database. And now it's being displayed to me from the database. And that's the form. Once we say tweet, it sends it to the backend. That is basically what a form does. It's very basic. And we're not going to do anything with databases or the backend in this tutorial. So don't worry about it. Those things are a bit complex for our current skill level. So first we have a form. Now we're not going to talk about the action just yet. But this is a form. Once we have this and we save, we're not going to see anything. But we can put things inside of it. For example, a select. So here we have two things that are given to us. We have a name and we have an ID. We can actually say friends and friends in both of them. It doesn't matter that they're the same. Now this names right here is something you're mostly going to be working with once you get to the backend. This name allows you to kind of link the data with each other. So when you say, I want the data of friends, this name right here, not the ID, but the name, then it will send all of the data inside of the select to you. So you didn't really have to worry about this right now. So for right now, I'm going to actually just delete that because we didn't need it. We'll be needing that once we get to the backend. But you can still add it to your forms and stuff. It works perfectly fine. Now this ID we'll be using a bit later. If you haven't seen my video on IDs, I highly recommend you do. So yeah, then in here, this select statement takes something that's called an option. Now this option contains a bunch of values for us. So here I can say Jack, and then what the user sees, we can say is Jack, my friend. So when we send the data to the backend, this is the data that's going to be sent back, this value. This here is what the user will see. So we won't receive this in the backend. We will receive this value here. So it's very important to take note what the value is, because the value is what we'll see once we want to work with this data in the backend. However, this is what the user will see. They won't see this. Now we can do this. If we save this, we'll see a little thing like this. Jack, my friend. If we click on it, we have options to choose from. Let's actually zoom in a bit here. There we go. We have options to choose from. So we have Jack, my friend, Nick, my friend, or Sally, my friend. And then we can select which one we want. So this is what the select does. It allows us to create a form thing like this, where you can select from a drop-down item. Now, let's say you want to make Nick the default one by default. So the selected one by default. You can then just say selected. If you do that and save it, you'll see Nick is now by default selected. If I refresh, it's going to be Nick. If I were to remove this, it will just take the first one in the list, and that's Jack. So you can use selected to say which one should be selected by default. You can also do something such as here with select. You can say size is equal to, and let's say 2. Now if we do this, you can actually see there's a little scrolling now. So it's no longer a drop down, but a scroll down. And then the size you set here is how many values it will show at once. In this case, if we say 3, it will show 3 at once. If we say 1, it's going to be a drop down. If we say 2, it's going to show 2. The more values we add here, of course, if we go like this, and we make this 4, then now, as you can see, it does show everything, but only 4 at a time. So you can use the size to say how much a specific person can see. Now, let's say you want the person to be able to select multiple at a time. So let's actually bring size back here. We make it 2. And we say multiple, just like that. Now, when you say this, the user is allowed to select more than one. So we go here and there. But if you say control, so if you hold control and you click somewhere, it allows you to select more. Let's actually change the size back because I think it will be easier to see it like this. Yes. So now you can select multiple. If you hold control, so take note, you do have to hold control. Otherwise, you can't select multiple. So just take note, some users might not know that you have to hold control or shift to select more than one. So you might have to make a little note there for the user themselves, or you have to use something else. Now let's actually go here and let's create a text area. We don't need a name for now. We can just remove that. The ID we can say is description. The column, that can be 30, the row can be 10, no problem. And in here is what the default text will be. So let's leave that empty for now. Now like this, it's just a basic text box. And the reason why it's so weird is because we actually had a space here and it's going to take that space literally. Now it's going to be normal. So now if we start here, it's going to take it in. So it's just a piece of text. This here, that's considered a text box. So like that, this would be a text box. So just take note. Now this right here, this can be used for something like a big chunk of text. So let's say you have a description, or you have something that's going to take more than one line of text to do. Then this will be the way to go. So not if you want to use not if you want to get like the user's name, or the user's age, or the user's password. This is not what it's for. It is mostly for descriptive stuff. So when someone maybe wants to post a post, unless that post is 1 sentence long, this would be the best way to go. And of course here we can say default disk. And then that will be all our default text, which we can also change. This rows and columns here just basically say how long it should be and how wide it should be. So we make columns 10, it's going to be 10 columns long. And we have rows, that is how long it would be. So here we can say 9, for example, or let's make it 1. Now as you can see, it's basically very small and you can't really see much. But you can also transform it with this little box thing here. So if we go like that, you can do it manually as well. That right there is very small, but you can use that to also resize it. So the user also has the option to resize it if it's too small for them. Next up, or actually, there's one thing I want to show you before we continue to the next one. I want to show you a label. Now, label is very nice because here we can basically say what something is, and when they click on the label, it will actually select that thing. For example, let's go here and say description. And in here we can say enter disk. Now here it is, and let's just actually make this look a bit better again by going like this maybe. There we go. So enter description. Once you click on it, it will automatically focus on this. So currently, if we type, we're not going to get anything. But if we click on this, we can start typing. So that's the nice thing about a label. Now this 4 right here, that's linked to the ID. That's why I didn't want to remove the ID earlier, because if we want to use label, then we'll need an ID to put its 4 to. So this is going to be linked to the ID. If the ID changes, then this will no longer work. Cool. Now we also have a button. So button. And here it can be like click me. Now take note. In a form, there are 2 types of buttons you can get. You can get the submit button, and you can get the button. Both of those two do 2 entirely different things. The button allows you to click it and it will not submit the form. But the submit button will submit the form. This right here, this is by default a submit button. So let's go here and we will make this one the submit and this one the button. So we can just say type is equal to button. So this button can be clicked without actually submitting the form. This button, if it's clicked, is going to submit the form. So let's go here and say submit. And what I mean by submit is it will send the data to the backend. I'll actually give you all a little bit of a real life example of where this submit button would actually be useful. But right now, let's focus on this. Now, currently if we click the buttons, only the submit button will do something and we'll just refresh the page. And in here with the click me, this is a normal button. You can actually make the button do things. Now, usually I don't really cover things outside of the topic that we're doing. But because I think this isn't a bad idea, I'm going to show you all what this button can do. So we can say on click. So when someone clicks the button, so it's on the user click event. So if we click it, it's going to do an on click because we're clicking it. So when it gets clicked. And in here we can say alert and then quotes. Now, if you used double quotes here, then you'll have to use single quotes here. If you used single quotes here, then you'll have to use double quotes here. Because if you use double quotes here, it's going to break out of the quoting system we have. Or if you just want to be safe, just use these quotes right here. They're right next to the one on a normal UA2T keyboard. Now I'm going to use single quotes. And here you can say clicked. Now this right here is JavaScript. We're not going to go too deep in it because it's JavaScript. We're doing HTML. But basically we're saying once we click the button, alert the user that was clicked. Now if we click it, it's going to throw an alert that says clicked. And right now you have written your very first JavaScript as well. Now something that can also be pretty cool is the field set. So field set, and take note, you don't have to remember everything I'm teaching in this tutorial because I'm going to teach you a lot of things in this tutorial. So here we can then add a legend, and this legend can be something like tell us about yourself. And then we can have if you want, you can have a label, and here we can say name, and then maybe another label that says age, and then age. Cool. Now currently this is how it will look. Tell us about yourself, then with a little square around it. That's the field set. So this square, that's the field set, and the text here, that's the legend. Now we can of course put things here such as an input, which we will be getting into a bit more later. But yeah, so there's an input, and we can also put a BR tag here to break the line like that. And now we already have a kind of cool form. Now what I want to do is I want to talk about the input. So there's a lot of things you can do with input. So let's get through them. So we have an input, and by default it's of type text. Now this right here is like a minified version of a text area. This is what you use if you want to get passwords, emails, names, and maybe like a search query. This is what you'd use. For a text area, you'd use descriptions and anything that will need more than one line, basically. So here we can say Steve to say my name. Now you can have different types of input. In this case, it's a type of text. But let's actually create a few. So the type password. So let's actually keep one for text and then one for password. I would like that. Then the password. Now the difference between these two are, and I should just probably put a BR here, is that this top one, the text, will display the text. The bottom one will not. It will just be a bunch of dots. You can actually customize what type of dots these are. So that's pretty interesting if you might want to. But you'll, I think, need a bit of CSS for that. Anyhow, then we also have another type of input, which is of type submit. So you have the choice between a button, which can have two parts, either a button or a submit button. The input type submit only has one thing it can do. It can submit. It's a button with the purpose of submitting data. And let's say we have a few inputs here. Let's say text and also text. And then we're going to give them both values. And the value is basically just what's going to be inside of the input. It's almost like a default value. You can change this. And here we can say 24, and here we can say Nick. So now we have two inputs, one that says Nick and one that says 24. You can change them, no problem. This is just the default value, so if we refresh, it's going to give us those as default. Now we can have an input of type reset, and this will basically reset our things to default. So if we go here, we say reset, it's going to reset everything to default. I feel a lot of people don't know about this, but it's a really useful button to have, because it resets all of our input back to its default. Next up, I want to talk about the radio input type. So here we can have a type of radio, and we can give it an ID, and let's say Jack, and we do need to give it anything else. Here I can just say Jack as well. So if we say this, we get 3 little dots. Now currently, you can't really understand what those dots mean. So here we can add a label for, and here we can say Jack, and here you can say Jack. So let's add a bunch of labels. Boom, like that. Now this one will contain Nick, and this one will contain Maggie. Now Nick here will be for Nick. So let's go here, ID, Nick, and this right here, Maggie. And we also want to split them up, so they're not all on the one line. So we can say BR. Now, you'll notice we have a radio button group. So, what's a radio button group, you may ask? Well, you basically have a few things you can choose from, almost like a drop down, but you can only select one of them. So if I select Maggie, I can't select, oh wait, problem here is you can't actually select all 3 of them. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to give them all the same name. So here you can say name is equal to best friend, because only one of them will be submitted to the backend. So they can all have the same name, since only one will be submitted to the backend. Now, if you select one, you can only select one of them. So, but yeah, so that's a radio button group. You can only select one of them. You can't select more than one. On the contrary, you can have something that's even cooler. You can have a checkbox. And actually said best friend and not best friend, but that's fine. We can now change the name to be something different, because currently with a checkbox you can submit more than one thing. Now if we save it, we'll have squares. Now basically a checkbox is like a radio button. However, you can send more than one. So you can select more than one thing that you want to send in. So that's the difference. A radio button, you can only select one of them. A checkbox, you can select as many as you want. And you can also unselect them. Something you can't do with a radio button. So if you have selected a radio button, you have to select a different radio button in order to unselect the previous. So if I were to just change this back to radio button, once I've selected that, I can't unselect it. So if I select this one, this will be unselected, but now this one will be selected. You can also make that this one is selected by default by saying checked, and I will make sure one of them is selected by default, so they have to select one anyways then. So by saying checked, you can say which one is selected by default. Now you can do the same with checkboxes. So if we go here to checkbox again, and we just make this 1, or yeah, I guess 2 will work, 1 and then 3. Then now we have our checkboxes, and there we go. Now we have our checkboxes. And as you can see, this one is checked by default because we have the checked right here. So in the middle, the checked is right there. We can add the check on more things. So now 2 will be checked by default, and then the user will have to uncheck them if they don't want them. So yeah, that's the difference between a checkbox and a radio button. Now, inputs can be a little less boring as well. For example, let's just keep one input here. We can remove checked, as well as the name, as well as the value, as well as the ID. Okay, now here we can do something like color. Now it's a color input. Currently it's just a black box, but if we click on it, we are able to select colors and get an RGB value back. I think, yes, we can even change it to something else. For example, hexadecimal, RGB, and HSL. So this is pretty neat if you want to use something like this. You can also get a date with an input. So here it just says day, month, year. If we click on it, we can select a date. So that's pretty cool. So now it will fill that date for us, and it will be able to be sent to the backend. You also have an input type of email. For example, if we say here type, and we make it email, if we save it, we can enter an email in here. Now currently you won't really see anything happen, but if we were to add an input here of type submit, and we were to save this and then enter some random thing in here, say submit, it will tell us to please include an @ symbol inside of our email address. So this also does some extra things for us. Now, what if you want them to actually enter their email? They have to be forced to enter their email. You can say required. You can do this with any input type, not just email. You can do it with name, with password, with basically anything, file, anything. And this means if they try to submit without filling in this field, it will tell them it's required. Then try and fake it, then it will also say, hey, this needs an @ symbol. And then if you do that, and now we'll actually submit it. So take note, you can use this required basically anywhere. I can change this to, let's say, text, and now this text will be required. If I submit, then it says I should fill it in. This can be password, this can be anything. So this required just basically means the user has to fill it in, otherwise they're not allowed to go. And you can have it on as many things as you want, and some might even not need it. So if we go like this, you'll see this one needs it, this one needs it, this one needs it, but this one does not need it. So if I say submit, it's going to submit it. Next up is the file type. Now the file type is a little bit tricky because oftentimes if you really want to send the file to the backend, you have to actually do a little bit of a workaround, which we're not going to do right now because I'd rather not. Now here you can just say file. Now if you say that, someone can choose a file, and let's say choose file, and here we go, there's my file I want to choose. And why is everything so big? Open it. As you can see now, it will also be there with a little text saying which one we selected, and we can also submit that file. You can also get an input type of number. So if we go here, then this can be a number, and we can actually increment it here. You can't put text in here, but you can put numbers in here. You can also give it a minimum and a maximum. For example, here we can say 10. So if we try and enter anything below 10, like 2, it's not going to be able to take it because 10 is the minimum. If we were to give it a maximum, then we can't enter anything, let's say above 100. So here, and it actually resized to what we might want. So now we can't put anything underneath 10 because that will be too low. And we can't put anything above 100 because that will be too high. These little buttons can also not go higher than what they are set, and they can't go lower than what they are set. So we give it up until 10. It can't go lower. But if it's in between the max and minimum, it can go. You can do a similar thing with text type of input. So here you can say a min length, and let's make it 10. I never really needs quotation marks. And you can also do a max length, and let's make it 20. Now, if we try and enter something here and we submit, it cannot because we need at least 10 characters. That's the minimum we gave it. Now, if we enter too much in here, actually that should be max length and not min. That's why it did that. So max, there we go. Now, if we enter too much in here, it won't even accept more than what we enter. So 20 is literally the max. We can't go more than that. So yeah, as long as it's a bit more than 10 characters and less than 20 characters, you can submit the data. You also have an input type of type range, which has a minimum and a maximum value. So let's make minimum equal to 0 and max equal to 100. And now, there we go. So this is basically the minimum and the maximum. You can also give it a default value to start at. So value can be like 75. And now it will by default be here. So that is 75th value. This would be 0. This would be 100. This would be about 50. Or actually, I think that's all. We have already passed the 30-minute mark, which is already a very long tutorial. So I'll save the next 2 tutorials for the next tutorial. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all again in the next HTML tutorial.